Hello, and welcome to Constitution Day 2023. I'm your host, Kirk Higgins, and I am joined once again this year by my colleague, Rachel Davison-Humphreys. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi.
How are we feeling about Constitution Day Live this year?
Well, I'm pretty excited, as I usually am, about Constitution Day. It's one of the biggest civic holidays of the year, the only kind of time, other than the 4th of July, where we really celebrate our Constitution and our history together in school around the country.
Yeah, I'm excited. And our theme this year is reflection, choice, and self-government. That phrase, reflection and choice, comes from the first Federalist paper. When Alexander Hamilton wrote this first essay, the future of the new Constitution was anything but certain. The delegates to the Philadelphia Convention had drafted a new document that would override the existing legal order that had governed the nation through the American Revolution, the Articles of Confederation, but they didn't know what the future held. The Federalist essays were a defense of the new Constitution, and Hamilton opens them with a challenge. He stated that it was up to you, the American people, to make an important decision, quote, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. Today, this question endures. Are we capable of maintaining good government from reflection and choice? That is a question that we need to answer. And this year, for Constitution Day, we're going to explore exactly that. So, to do that, we've lined up a lot of great guests.
Dr. Andrew Lang will talk about his book, A Contest of Civilizations, exposing the crisis of American exceptionalism in the Civil War era. John Zogby and Lucca Ruggieri about polling and its place in a self-governing society. We have Medal of Honor recipient Flo Groberg talking about character and virtue. And our very own Joe Schmidt and his co-author Nichelle Pickney as they discuss civil discourse. We also hope you'll stick around, as later today we're going to officially announce our National Civics Teacher of the Year Award.
And to get us started on our journey, we're joined by two of our colleagues, Mary Patterson and Tony Williams, who are exploring the historical context of the Constitution and the roads of Washington, D.C.
I know there are lots of shows where celebrities are in cars singing or getting coffee. Well, BRI wanted to build our own. We're proud to present the Bill of Rights Institute new series, Civics in a Civic.
Hey everybody, welcome to Civics in a Civic. It's Constitution Day, and what better way to celebrate than by driving around the DC area in a Civic, talking about civics. I'm Mary Patterson, your driver and asker of questions, and with me in the passenger seat is BRI's senior fellow, scholar, author, my personal ChatGPT, Tony Williams. Tony, are you ready to talk civics?
I am always ready to talk civics, Mary.
Hang on to your coffee. Here we go.
I got my coffee right here.
All right, Tony, so I just want to say for your benefits that I do have a valid driver's license, and I've been driving for 20-some years, and in those 20-some years, I have never gotten a ticket. No, that's not true. I've gotten 2 tickets, I think, but neither of them were my fault. So you're in good hands.
Well, I was not actually worried about tickets, really more accidents, but I noticed you didn't mention those.
No. Well, I was in one accident, but that also was not my fault.
Oh, it never is.
So we are actually driving. We are going by the Potomac River and the tidal basin. So we're going to see some cool monuments along the way. We're going to see the Lincoln Memorial. We'll see the Washington Monument. We are going to pass Tony's favorite monument, the Lyndon B. Johnson Memorial Grove. That will be coming up right here on our right. Shout out to LBJ. We're celebrating Constitution Day. It's a big deal here at the Bill of Rights Institute. So my first question for you is going to be, what's the big deal?
What is the big deal, right? I mean, September 17th rolls around every year. Some schools, universities kind of mandated to teach about it, but I think it's a good opportunity, don't you? I mean, at BRI, we reflect on founding principles, founding ideals, pretty much every day, right? 8 hours a day, every day, and that's what we do, right? But it's a great opportunity, I think, for students, teachers, and citizens too, right? To just reflect on who we are as Americans, right? What do we believe in? What unites us?
An anonymous teacher in my days of teaching used to give out a Constitution crossword puzzle on Constitution Day, and that was the extent of the celebration. So I like what you said about founding principles, or this idea of ideas, right? So it's not just the actual document that's like, you know, in the National Archives. Can't steal it, Tony's tried. But these ideas that are always with us. And they're also a big deal, capital B, capital D, here at BRI. So what are these founding principles, these constitutional principles that you referenced?
I mean, at BRI we talk a lot about inalienable rights, natural rights. We talk about equality and justice and liberty, all sort of the bigger ideals here. But then we talk about some of the more specific constitutional ideals, like, you know, separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, all the good stuff, all this stuff that gets me really, really excited about what I do as a senior fellow at BRI. And I know it gets you excited too, so I see you chuckling over there, but I know you get pumped about it.
I get more pumped, I think, about the foundational principles, natural rights, the ones that we're all born with, because I think that's such a cool idea. But again, that idea at the time when the Constitution was written was not something that everybody bought into. So I think it's, I don't know, would you say it's fair to say that we take these ideas for granted?
You know, I don't know. I think they're there, right? I mean, I think they're always present. Americans, I think, have an instinctual love of liberty. You know, we love equality. We want to see equality under the law. We all want to live under a just constitutional order, have equal justice. So I think that sort of our heart yearns for them, not only as human beings, but as Americans. But then, you know, sometimes we forget some of the more specific ones, like separation of powers, checks and balances, you know, federalism. Why should I care about these things? Bicameralism, two house legislatures. These seem somewhat distant, maybe from our ordinary everyday experience, that we don't think about them. But I think those, as you said, those kind of natural rights principles, those really foundational ideals, I think are there. They may be a little latent, but they're there and with us all the time.
While we're at this red light, Tony, I would be interested in hearing a little bit about the origin story of the Constitution, because I am such a history nerd. I love the backstory on anything. So we have this document, Constitution. It gets its own day, like Free Cone Day at Ben & Jerry's, which is my personal favorite civic holiday, by the way. So how did this document come to be? Give me the Sparks Note version.
Well, it came to be because we failed in our first attempt, right? I mean, so
I can identify with failure.
Yeah, I mean, we all can, right? I mean, they launched this experiment in liberty, and it didn't go real well at first, right? I mean, they fought the Revolutionary War to a successful conclusion, and started off with the Articles of Confederation, but as you know, pretty much largely didn't work. Don't need separation of powers, check. Don't need any checks and balances, check. Don't need a two-house legislature, check. Don't need a very strong central government. The states can run everything, check. I mean, they were just checking all the wrong boxes.
What is the most egregious thing the states were doing under the Articles of Confederation? Because they were kind of going hog wild, is my understanding.
That's a good one. There's so many, right? I mean, they were almost at war with each other. They were engaging on these trade wars, violating the peace treaty of 1783. Passing tariffs on each other, or taxes. I mean, they were basically doing everything to impede the national government and each other, and just they were getting taxed, and they're like, not up in here. They're not paying. We're not sending the central government money.
If you could declare war on any state, what would it be and why?
Back then, it would have been definitely Rhode Island.
Rhode Island?
Yes.
Why?
Because they were frustrating the whole thing, right? They kept voting no on everything and were just impeding all the workings of the government. So yeah, that's a no-brainer.
That segment sure was a lot of fun. We'll be returning to Tony and Mary throughout our program today. But I think what they point to is that we really do have an opportunity on Constitution Day to reflect on the Constitution and our founding principles. It's more than just a governing document. It really is something that has ideas that matter because they have shaped and continue to shape what our government does and how it functions within our lives. It's important that we reflect or think about and grapple with some of these foundational ideas because they do have an impact on our everyday lives and they help ensure that the government is working to uphold our fundamental rights. Part of that is engaging with complex ideas and viewpoints that are at the heart of the American experience, American life. One of these ideas that has come up a lot throughout American history is this idea of American exceptionalism. This is a phrase that's highly contentious and is something that's been debated by scholars and by individuals and was the focus of a recent book by scholar Andrew Lang. Our colleague Tony Williams sat down with Andrew to discuss his new book entitled A Contest of Civilizations, Exposing the Crisis of American Exceptionalism in the Civil War Era. Together they explored why it is important for Americans to have conversations about contested ideas. Let's check it out.
For this special episode of Scholar Talks on Constitution Day Live, the guiding question is, why is it important for Americans to have conversations about contested ideals? Our very special guest today, Andrew Lang, is a professor of history at Mississippi State University. His first book, In the Wake of War, Military Occupation, Emancipation, and Civil War America, won the Tom Watson Brown Book Award. His second, A Contest of Civilizations, Exposing the Crisis of American Exceptionalism in the Civil War Era, was a finalist for the prestigious Lincoln Prize. I am Tony Williams, Senior Fellow at the Bill of Rights Institute, and I want to welcome you to this very special episode of Scholar Talks on Constitution Day Live. Andy, I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, Constitution Day Live is a great time to reflect on the themes that you've written about, on American ideals, about American exceptionalism, those common ideals we have as Americans, but it's also an important time maybe to reflect on those times where we've disagreed about them as well.
Indeed. The whole idea of American identity, American exceptionalism, one can argue, and I certainly do argue, are notions that are even older than the United States itself, dating in the deep colonial past and transcending all the way to the present.
Now, you discussed the contested idea of American exceptionalism in the Civil War era. Can you maybe briefly describe for us what you mean by American exceptionalism?
I know for me, and when I teach my own classes, I like to have others define it for me because those who came before us have defined it much better than I can attempt to do. So I'll go to that great American commentator who was not even American himself, but the Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville during his grand tour in the United States in the 1830s. He said most famously, "The situation of the Americans is therefore entirely exceptional, and it is to be believed that no other democratic people will be placed in it." Now, what did he mean? Well, he certainly did not mean that the United States was superior, better, on an upward trajectory to some destined future. If anything, what he meant is that what was happening in the United States and with this rise of American democracy, he was looking at Americans as kind of a weird group of people. And quite literally, an exceptional people, a different people. And what did he mean by that? A people that were removed from and unbound from a feudal past, absolved from a noble ruling tradition, uncorrupted by an established state church. And what he found is instead a society that believed itself to be egalitarian, equalitarian is what he might say, people who defined their democratic republic based on what it was not: a monarchy, an aristocracy, an arbitrary ruling class. And if anything, what he noticed is that Americans believed themselves to be the first society in world history ever to predicate their nation on the ideal that the individual is sovereign and that the individual owes him and herself to natural rights that government is bound to protect.
So as a follow-up, how did these rival conceptions of these ideals develop in the course of the mid-19th century between the different sections of the country?
Yeah, I mean, this in my reading of the American past, it's the fundamental and ultimately irreconcilable definitions and conceptions of American exceptionalism that contribute to the coming of the American Civil War. And at the heart of this debate on what makes America unique in the 19th century, we have to locate the central place of slavery within an otherwise republic of liberty. It is by far the most consequential debate on the role of slavery in a constitutional republic, but a constitutional republic predicated in the Declaration of Independence on the ideals of natural human equality. And what we see at the very outset of the American political experience, at the Constitutional Convention itself, the convention meets in 1787 with something already having happened over the previous decade in the newly found United States, and that is this presumption, as Sean Wilentz has described so well in his own work, this idea that governments do not or are not obligated to uphold property in man. This is itself a unique moment in human political traditions. Up to that point in human societies, it was just assumed that slavery and human bondage was a natural, normal part of life until the Revolutionary Era, when governments in the northern colonies, northern states begin to question this presumption. And so, as Wilentz describes, and I completely buy his argument, he says that perhaps it's not slavery that caused the American Civil War, but rather perhaps it is anti-slavery that caused the Civil War. Because we would never have the rise of a pro-slavery American exceptionalism, a pro-slavery ideology, without its predecessor in anti-slavery.
And how did these differing northern and southern understandings of American ideals shape their reactions to the tumultuous events of the 1840s and 1850s?
It's a great question. By the 1840s and 50s, slaveholders in the United States had accrued a powerful and disproportionate share of political authority in the federal government. And anti-slavery advocates, both white and black, and ultimately the Republican Party by 1854, with the inception of the Republican Party, believed that slaveholders, should they proliferate human bondage across the nation, across the federal territories, across the continent, they would ultimately eradicate opportunity from common individual citizens from claiming private property, engaging in social mobility, economic independence, and personal sovereignty. Ultimately, Republicans alleged slaveholders and their allies in the Democratic Party for perpetuating a slave power conspiracy to overturn the entire democratic constitutional edifice of the American political order. Conversely, slaveholders alleged that anti-slavery advocates, in their abolitionist rhetoric and their anti-slavery rhetoric, ultimately would inspire the enslaved in the South to engage in massive, bloody rebellions and insurrections on the par of Jamaica and Haiti, Barbados, and overturn one of the last remaining powerful slaveholding nations in the world. And so where does the compromise come in within this kind of condition? That's the question.
So as a follow-up observation, perhaps, this debate over these rival views was rarely civil. There debate, threats, even sort of widespread violence, even in the halls of Congress, maybe with the exception of the Compromise of 1850. But, all of this contention that you're talking about leads to civil war.
This is one of the great ironies, really, because in the American exceptionalist tradition in the 19th century, on the one hand, Americans of all stripes believed their nation to be unique, separate, destined, even on a separate historical track from the rest of the world, which is what? Civil war, civil conflict, monarchical consolidation, centralizing power. And yet, in many respects, the United States is following along the same 19th century trajectory of civil conflict and civil disturbance that most other societies in the 19th century world experienced. And so Americans really did have to deal with this. There was always a complementary, abiding fear in the United States about disunion, about the prospect of civil war, what it would render, because in the advent of national collapse and civil war, the entire process of self-government would never be restored. The great fear among all parties is if this experiment in the United States fails, then every other opponent across the world of democracy, constitutional republicanism could point to the failure of the United States and say, see, it doesn't work. These upstart Americans tried something and it failed because, of course, it was destined to fail. Some people are born to rule and others are born to be ruled. And so this is in the back of the minds of most Americans percolating as the nation tries to negotiate the crisis over slavery.
And so what are the rival views of Abraham Lincoln and the Confederates regarding secession?
Yeah, this is where it all points to. With Abraham Lincoln's election to the presidency in 1860, and by that, let's understand what that means. It's not just the election of Abraham Lincoln, it's the election of the first major anti-slavery party in American history to claim the White House and a majority in Congress. And at that point, they're pledged, explicitly pledged to placing slavery on the ultimate road to extinction. Now that could mean a century-long plan of gradual, compensated, very conservative processes of emancipation. But one thing was sure, the Republican Party pledged to place slavery in a confined space where it existed, pledged not to let it expand into the territories, not to expand into the Caribbean, hem it in, and ultimately choke it off. Well, if that's what they pledged, slaveholders in the American South believed them. And they said, all right, well, if this is the Republican plan, then our status as one of the world's lone remaining slaveholding societies is indelibly threatened. And if that's threatened, so is our constitutional equality under the American political order. And thus, what slaveholders turned to was the tradition of 1776, political self-determination, as they read the Declaration of Independence and pursued what they argued to be a peaceable secession. But equally true, in their words, they said, what we're going to do is we're going to create the world's first nation dedicated entirely, explicitly, to the proposition that all men are not created equal. As the Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said, our new nation is built upon, its foundation is established, and its cornerstone rests upon the great truth. These are Stephens' words, the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and moral condition. End quote. Nothing like this had ever happened on this level. Well, we have a crisis. If the United States is indeed a quote-unquote exceptional nation predicated upon peaceable democracy, well, then secession is an illegitimate proposition. And that's the basis on which Lincoln contested the secession crisis. It's the idea that if political discontents lose a free, fair, and legitimate election, but then destroy the the constitutional basis of the entire system, then democracy itself loses all legitimacy. And this would be only the first secession movement of its kind. What would happen in the northern states should a northern political minority lose an election? What would happen in the West if a Western political minority lost an election? The entire continent would erupt into these petty little fiefdoms of conflict that look much like the old world in Europe. And the American experiment, as they knew it and as we know it today, would be over. And so there are two explicit competing claims to exceptionalist purpose right at the outset in 1860 and 61.
And during the Civil War, how did emancipation and the enlistment in the Union Army of African American soldiers affect the understanding of American exceptionalism during the war?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for us to recognize that emancipation is entirely a contingent outgrowth of how the Civil War evolved and ultimately concluded. Emancipation is not a foreordained end to the Civil War, just as United States victory is not a foreordained end. But as the war expands, as it becomes increasingly violent, as it becomes clear in the United States that the Confederacy is waging a very committed resistance to the United States, and if the Confederacy is predicating its existence on slavery, then it is only just, legally, morally just, to turn that institution against the rebellious states. But it also works insofar as emancipation ultimately cures the great cancer that has roiled the American political experiment for 80 plus years by removing the source of disunion, by removing the central source of sectional discord, by establishing, not at first, but ultimately establishing some type of consensus that slavery has no present and future in the United States. Only then can the United States, hopefully, in the minds of emancipation's practitioners, hopefully can the United States stave off future secession movements. Now, the enlistment of African American soldiers is a central feature in this. Ever since the beginning of the war, African American men petitioned the Lincoln government to enlist on behalf of the United States. Now think about this. This is powerful. We have in the 19th century few better exponents of the American project than African Americans, the very people who live at best as second-class citizens in the United States and at worst as enslaved subjects in the United States. And here they are in 1861 recognizing that their service in Union armies fulfills, gives purpose, gives definition, gives meaning to the very claim that the United States has always advertised itself, in Lincoln's words, as the last best hope. These men are not turning on the Republic. They view themselves as equal participants in the Republic that they at once want to preserve and ultimately perfect.
Tony and Andy's conversation is really powerful. And anyone who knows me knows I will enjoy most any conversation that prominently features the works of Alexis de Tocqueville. We will return to their conversation later in the program. But it was their discussion around equality that I thought was so thought-provoking. The idea of equality sits at the heart of our American conception of self-government. We talk about it in terms of the consent of the governed, of our representation, and the responsibility the government has to its people. It is the end that this reflection and choice hopefully uphold. Hamilton was probably rightfully worried that we could, if we were not careful, fall back on accident and force, or just chance and power to shape our institutions. Now, the central challenge to this idea of equality in the early days of the American regime, and now, was the institution of slavery. And Tony and Andy's conversation about that was really helpful. His comments about anti-slavery bringing about the Civil War is a lot to chew on. Discussing slavery requires really good context and nuance. And BRI just developed a new free high school resource that can help do that. Our design team has worked hard to make this resource a useful and powerful teaching tool, and we want to tell you a little bit about it.
Hi everyone, my name is Mary Patterson and I'm a Senior Content Specialist here at the Bill of Rights Institute. I'm so excited to introduce you to one of our newest resources, Slavery in the Founding. What makes this resource special and how can you use it with your students? Let's take a closer look. Here's the homepage for Slavery in the Founding. You can find it by typing Slavery in the Founding up here in the search bar or by going to the Resources tab. So this curriculum really explores what I call the million-dollar question in U.S. history. How did a system of slavery develop and persist within a framework of liberty in the United States? We've built in a lot of special features to help you grapple with this question. As you can expect from a BRI resource, this is rooted in primary sources. We've provided you with contextual essays, again, which is a standard for a BRI resource, but something new in this curriculum is that we've given you a slide deck with abridged context for each lesson. We've given you some worked examples of primary source analysis. This is something that you can do with your students in the classroom or have students go through it on their own asynchronously. And I will show you that in just a moment. And we've also given you some supports or suggestions for in-person and online learning. Let's take a look at some of these primary sources. Here are the 6 lessons in slavery in the founding. So we give you an overview, a case study of slavery before the founding, before the Declaration of Independence. It specifically focuses on colonial Virginia with a note that slavery would have looked different in the different mainland colonies of North America. And we go all the way through slavery in the Constitution, and of course, why and how slavery endures and expands in the American Republic and the consequences of that. Let's take a look at this first lesson and take a look at some of the primary sources. So you can see you've got a guiding question up here at the top. This is what students are wrestling with. You have your objectives. You have all your materials linked here. Again, your background essay, the slide deck, and you have a glossary and then all of your handouts. Notice here under primary sources that we've built in some student choice. So you have a required primary source, but then students can also choose the additional resources that they will look at. So here is the required primary source in lesson 1. You can see that we have given you, again, we've restated the essential question for the lesson. Students have I can statements so they know what they're supposed to be doing as they look at this resource. They are front-loaded with all of the vocabulary that they'll need to access this primary source. We've given them historical context so they can place this source in its particular time and place. And then they have the source itself. We've also given you comprehension and analysis questions that you can use or modify as best suits your classroom. I'm going to show you one of these mock-up primary sources, again, from this first lesson. This is one of the additional supports that you'll find in this resource. So in this worked example, you have a model of how to approach a primary source. So pre-reading and analysis strategies that you could go over with your students in the classroom, or again, have them do it on their own asynchronously. So it's basically showing them how to use all the different pieces of the primary source to help them with their analysis. It's also helping them pull out main ideas from the source itself. Again, this particular primary source is fabulous. I hope you'll check it out. I'm back on the Slavery in the Founding homepage. Because it's Constitution Day, let's take a look at the lesson on slavery and the Constitution. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and here it is, Slavery in the United States Constitution. Once again, you have your guiding question and objectives and all the materials you'll need here. I want to show you the background slides. This is something new that we've built into Slavery in the Founding. In addition to the background reading, we also have a classroom-ready slide deck that you can show your students, again, in class or have them go through it asynchronously. So this lesson is all about having students grapple with this question. Was the Constitution a pro-slavery document or an anti-slavery document? So again, these slides are meant to give them all of the background, all of the context that they'll need to approach this lesson. After they've looked at their background, again, they're going to look at 2 amazing primary sources from William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass and go through a structured academic controversy activity to decide if the Constitution was a pro-slavery or an anti-slavery document. I'm going to open up this structured academic controversy directions here. This sounds like a mouthful, but it's actually a fantastic activity to look at two sides of an issue that's useful across a lot of topics in history and civics classrooms. Even if you've never done one before, we've given you very clear instructions and time limits so you and your students can comfortably engage in this activity with these great resources. I'm back on the home page once again, and again you can see we have 6 lessons here, giving a case study of the origins of American slavery, talking about the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War, afterwards the Constitution, and how slavery endures within the American Republic. The way these activities are designed, you can take pieces a la carte to fit within your classroom to work with your needs, even if you can't commit to a full lesson. I hope you're as excited as I am about this new resource. Slavery in the Founding is meant to help your students think about the paradox of slavery within a framework of liberty in the United States. We've built in additional supports to help learners of all levels access this important conversation. We hope you'll be a part of it. On behalf of everyone here at the Bill of Rights Institute, thank you for all you do. It's an honor to support you, and happy Constitution Day.
We are thrilled to share this new resource with you all. It is a critical topic that we hope everyone has a chance to dive into. Examining history through primary sources can be really powerful, and the lesson that Mary highlighted on slavery and the Constitution is a great example of that. It shows through the documents themselves how it is that the issue of slavery was grappled with during the Constitutional Convention. Throughout the day today, we've been engaging with this idea of reflection and choice. One of the clear places that we see the American people reflecting and choosing is in polls. Polls and polling come up a lot. It seems almost daily to me. And I can promise you that as we get closer to the presidential election, you're going to see more and more polls. Our colleague Stan Swim had the chance to sit down with 2 pollsters, one established, John Zogby, and another one just beginning his career, Lucca Ruggieri. Let's hear what they had to say about the role of polling in a self-governing society.
In Federalist 1, Publius placed before the people of the United States a challenge. He states that it has been reserved to the people, by their conduct and example, the opportunity to decide on an important question, whether or not societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend on their political constitutions on accident and force. People of the United States had a responsibility to meaningfully reflect and carefully decide whether this new Constitution would adequately protect their liberties. We have that same responsibility today as we work to live under that Constitution, continue to operate a society that serves for everyone's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And we're pleased to have a conversation today with 2 people who are playing a role in that conversation. We're joined by 2 pollsters, one who is more seasoned and one who is just getting started. John Zogby has been a pollster and opinion researcher for decades, has an excellent track record on a variety of questions touching many aspects of American politics and daily life. Lucca Ruggieri has just been in this business officially for about a year, but has already done some great work. And we're excited to talk with both of these gentlemen about why they chose to do this, what they think their work does to contribute to our national conversation. And so if we can do so, I welcome John and Lucca. I'm glad to have you with us today. You've been at this for a while. Could you just tell our audience briefly what drew you to polling and how you got started with the firm that you're running now?
Well, there were 3 career paths in the 70s and early 80s for me. I was a college professor. I was a community activist, including actual community organizer, president. And I was also someone who was always fascinated by this. And in the early 80s, I got a chance to run for mayor of my community and to do my own polls. And I guess to quote Thomas Marshall, I'd rather be white president. I lost as mayor, but I knew exactly how much I was going to lose by. And I thought, hey, this is pretty good. So in 1984, I started playing from the bottom up, worked my way up to ultimately Murdoch Empire, Reuters, NBC News.
Lucca, you're just getting started. I take it you've not yet been a college professor. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to start Patriot Polling.
Yeah, well, I'm not even in college yet. But the way that it started is that a buddy and I, who I started Patriot Polling with, his name's Arhon Call. We were on the train, and I'm really more into the political side, and he's into data science and that sort of stuff. And we were talking, this is the summer of 2022, about the polling and how we thought, these midterm polls are going to be terrible. The polls in 2020 were terrible. The polls in 2016 were terrible. What is the differentiating factor there that separates the good polls from the bad polls? And we're all thinking about what are we going to do to get ourselves into college. So I had the idea, why don't we try conducting a few of our own polls? I mean, I've got the political side down, you've got data science down. So, what's the worst that could happen? And then before you knew it, we had Nate Silver and 538 picking up our polls. And we were, I think, the first polling company to be founded by high schoolers to be put on the 538 aggregate. And, once that happened, it really got the ball rolling, and it turned into something a lot bigger than we thought it would. But it's been a terrific experience.
Sounds great. Well, but I think every entrepreneur could tell you a similar story, right, John? You start something and it goes lots of places you didn't think it would. A lot more work, too.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. I got a D in statistics my freshman year in college. I love to tell folks.
Could each of you take just a minute and reflect on the role of polling in American politics? And John, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Lucca as soon as you're finished.
It's organic to a democracy. A democracy is based on the will of the people, of, by, and for the, which means that as policies are made or debated, essential ingredient, not the dominant. And all polling does is offer a scientific approach to obtaining what that public is. There have been other methods years in other forms of government as well of collecting public opinion. We add some science.
Lucca?
I agree with what John said, but I also think that polling does have some influence on the way that things turn out. I can just say, in the Senate race in my home state of Pennsylvania, about a year ago, in the Republican primary, which is really what got me really interested in polling. The polls, they showed originally Dave McCormick and Dr. Oz in a virtual tie, but towards the end of the race, this sort of Trump candidate, Kathy Barnett, she started rising in the polls, and a lot of McCormick supporters switched their vote to Oz because they thought that Barnett was going to be a race between Barnett and Oz, and in the end, it ended up being Oz that won by less than 1,000 votes. So I do think polling can have a material impact on elections, and a lot of policies are decided based on polling. And but I do think it's important. Polling serves a very important role in giving both elected officials and the public an insight into what the general national opinion is on certain issues or local opinions or whatever it may be, but it serves a very important role in our democracy.
John, is there a tension then, if what Luke is describing makes sense? Is there any kind of tension between polling and pollsters and individual choice? Is it how does it help, or does it put thumb on the scales? How does that happen? How would you describe that?
That dramatic. It's not that dramatic, and I'm not so sure that what Lucca says is right. The dominance or the heavy influence. Look, you didn't need a poll to give you a sense that Richard Nixon was going to destroy George McGovern. There are people out there who say, well, this guy doesn't have a chance. I'm going to vote for the underdog. There's so many factors that are involved, how and why people make a decision. I'm not so sure that is among those dominant factors. Do I like the candidate? Does he or she present themselves well? Do they represent my core values? Those are important things. People can tell us answers to those questions.
Let's get to the craft of polling itself. Lucca, how did you put together questions as you were building the polls that you did over the past year? What was a good question? How did you decide what to ask? How did you decide how to ask it?
We just asked questions the way they were going to come up on the ballot, because I think if you add anything else in there, there's a lot of personal bias that starts to get injected. So, you just go to the ballot. What we would do, the whole reason why we were able to poll is because we used this method called IVR, which is basically a robot calling a bunch of people and reading out questions. And what it would do, it would ask you, in the Georgia Senate race, are you voting for Raphael Warnock, the Democrat, or Herschel Walker, the Republican? And that would be it. And then there would be the undecided option. But we didn't try to add any sort of other descriptors to our polls, because we think that's the way it's going to come up on the ballot, and that's the most accurate way of prefacing it.
John, I know you've done a lot more polls as you've done so. What else have you found goes into the preparation of questions?
I think, first of all, it's very important, as Lucca mentions, to include the name as it's going to appear on the ballot. That's really consistent with ultimately how people make their decision. But then I also, we as a company, have never really relied simply on the horse race. I want to know what people's values are. So whenever we'll poll on a candidate or policy, we'll ask our questions more attuned to how does this best express who you are? Which of the following best describes how you feel or where you stand? We'll try to get at core values. You feel, agree or disagree that terminating a fetus is manslaughter? Do you believe on the issue of abortion, ultimately a woman has a right to choose? Oftentimes on that question, all the time, we will get crossover. We'll get people who actually feel that abortion is manslaughter and that a woman has a right to choose. That allows us the sophistication to know which candidate is ultimately addressing those voters who are going to be voters who are conflicted on various things.
John, can you give me maybe a story that you've encountered in your work where the values told you something that maybe you didn't expect to find, or that turned out to be more deeply revelatory of where a question was headed?
I'm going to give you a famous story that I've written about, and I'll try to keep it short. But in daily tracking for NBC News and Reuters presidential race in 2000, we had Gore going up. Ultimately, Gore did win the popular vote, as you know. We're the only ones that captured, or by 0.5% in the popular vote, George W. Bush. But I added a question in, and it may seem frivolous, but I said to voters, live in the land of Oz, and this year there's an election for mayor of Oz. One of the candidates is the Tin Man. He's all brains and no heart. And another of the candidates is a Scarecrow. He's all heart and no brains. Would you vote for the election were held today? And it came out 46.2 for the Tin Man and 46.2 for the Scarecrow. That told me an awful lot about people's values. The fact that probably weren't going to know who won that election. And as you know, we didn't know who won that election until the Supreme Court decided.
I remember that story, right down to the hanging chads.
Yes.
Lucca, as you're getting in and building polls, what do you think polls can tell us, and what maybe not?
I think that what polling does provide is a broader snapshot into the electorate, and it can give you a general sense of what the electorate is thinking, and but it's not 100% accurate, which I think has been a problem with the way that people interpret polls, especially in the last couple of election cycles, because in a lot of these close races, a point or two or three makes a big difference in the outcome. But people hold polling to such a high standard that the way that an election comes out, they expect polling to be down to the dot, but the problem is it's just really tough to get it to that point of accuracy. So I think polling is a better measure for a less accurate, not a 100% accurate read of the electorate, but it gives you a good idea of what people are thinking. You're never going to get a perfect result with polling.
Yeah, I think that first, for starters, I think we as a profession have misled the public in terms of expectations. I've played that game for years, and I came out almost always on the right side of close races in terms of my record of accuracy. But I always knew that was ephemeral. 10 to 14% of voters now tell us in exit and post-election polls, I made up my mind on election day. which means that there's a lot of fluidity, a whole lot more fluid than you think. 2016, I heard Lucca just say that the polls were terrible. When you look closely at the national and then the statewide polls in battleground states, you will, it is unmistakable. There was a trend line away from Hillary and towards Donald Trump. That's not because necessarily that on the day before the election, they came out and said Hillary Clinton's going to lose Pennsylvania or Hillary Clinton's going to lose Hampshire, Wisconsin. It was because each of the last 9 days, Hillary was going down a point or two and Trump was gaining. That trend line was unmistakable.
So what you're saying, that the trend was important. That was the information value there, is that you could see there was a pretty strong signal. It wasn't vacillating all over the place.
No, it was not vacillating all over the place. There were outliers. I mean, there were polls that didn't capture it, but for the most part, if you know what you're looking for, and that's the thing that I try to do when I do forums like this. Don't rely on a pollster who has an R after their name or a D after their name. There's going to be some spin involved. Look for good independent polls with the tracker.
Let's talk a little bit about the practice of polling and whether or not that's changing or evolving at all, and kind of the electorate's relationship to pollsters. And John, I'll start with you, and then we're going to come to Lucca as maybe an interesting window into what could be coming. But how has the relationship between the electorate and pollsters changed in the time you've been at this? And you could talk about that and how people interact with folks on the phone who are calling to do surveys. What do you see in that relationship over time?
When I started in late 1984, Stan, we averaged 65% response rates. Everybody had a landline, 96% households. And culturally, socially, we answered the phone. It was not uncommon to hear on the other end, shh, please be quiet. Somebody's calling me from New York and has questions to ask. I've got to do this. That was then. There were virtually no answering machine in 1984. And socially, people were glad to answer the phone. In fact, here's something to chew on. It wasn't uncommon for an older woman to answer the phone and say, oh, no, you don't want to talk. That's the demure housewife that does not exist anymore. And it's also a woman telling a total stranger, hey, I'm home all alone. So, yes, things have changed dramatically with technology, answering machines, *69, so on. In our instance, much more reliance on online. And also, we do live phone calls and we do call cell phones. Cell phone is just not friendly technology.
Lucca, how did you conduct your polls? And after you're done answering that question, I want to talk about maybe what you see among your classmates and peers and how they react to polls. Well, let's start with, how'd you do yours? How did you do your polls?
We didn't have that much money to start off with, so we couldn't do one of the big operations that like ABC has with real human beings calling all these phone numbers. So what we found is a system called IVR, which is pretty much a robot that calls a ton of phone numbers. Most of the phone numbers either don't pick up or they hang up as soon as they hear that it's a robot. But if you do it enough times, you're going to get a suitable polling base. So we would just it's 15 cents per call. So we were able to get away with paying $2,000-$3,000 per poll, where a much larger sort of traditional polling operation would have cost a lot more than that. So what we had to do, since we only had access to landlines, because of it's some federal regulation that you can't use an automatic caller to call cell phone numbers. So we could only use landlines. There was a lot of weighing involved with our polls because we weren't getting a very accurate sample of the electorate. I mean, because it's much older, the people who have landlines now don't reflect the general makeup of the electorate. So we had to weigh our polls, the once we weighed our polls, we had a much different outcome than the raw result.
What do you see in your peers, your friends, your classmates, and so on? What's their relationship to polls? Do they even think about them, pay attention to them? How do they interact with polling?
They don't. I don't even think they think about it. People do think a bit about politics, but it never gets to the electoral level. I mean, I have never heard any of my classmates talking about polling or how they think an election is going to turn out or anything like that.
Lucca, how do you think polling contributes to or supports self-government?
I think that polling it gives elected officials an insight into what people think. I mean, because otherwise you have to wait until an election to know what people are thinking. But with polling, politicians, I mean, most of them want to do something that's popular. So a lot of times, if polling shows that something is unpopular, our elected leaders won't do that, and they'll do what the people support. So I think it gives our leaders a really good insight into what people are thinking, and it allows their views to be implemented without an election having to take place, or at least some of their views.
We all want to feel connected and want to know that, in our inner selves, we may have feelings, but where do we stand with everybody else? I think especially in a modern era where there are so many ways to isolate and atomize, what polls do is it offers us a connection to the rest of the world in a scientific way. In terms of matters of public policy, it's not only important for policymakers to understand where majorities are or where consensus ideas are, but it's also that we measure intensity. On a typical issue, you may have 60% who agree and 40% who disagree. But among that 40% who disagree, there is a solid half of them who are so intense, they're ready to march in the streets with pots and pans, make a lot of noise. Those are the sorts of things that polls have to try to measure. That's what moves policymakers.
But what, Lucca, do you hope people will be watching for, and how do you hope they will use polling, and how do you hope they will consume that data going into the next election cycle?
I think polling should not be as important as what they think is best for the country. I think people should base their votes on the candidate that they support instead of what they think polling indicates. I think what polling highlights for this next election is that most people really want an alternative to what we have now. People conduct polls, and it's like 70-80% want somebody new to run in the election. But as you can see, that's probably not going to happen. We've got the two front runners are very unpopular. I think that what polling should do is offer people an insight into the way that the country is thinking, because it seems often that people they don't understand that their viewpoint is there are a lot of people with other views across the country. So I think that what polling can do is really illuminate to people that there are opposing views, and there's a lot more diversity of thought than most people realize in this country. And I think that could be very useful.
I would ask that those who are on air or on the opinion pages be smarter. Instead of a very one-dimensional reading and interpretation, I wish that instead of looking always at the more apocalyptic results of a poll, how we disagree, what separates us, what makes us angry, that those who interpret would take a look at plenty of areas of consensus, plenty of areas where there is potential bridges, that be part of the conversation as well. And then the third thing I would say is I just wish we could get predictive and prediction out of the language. We don't predict. We suggest, we say who's ahead, say what a trend line is, but then the results come in on election day, and it's not the pollster's fault, or it's not anybody's fault.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for making time to speak with our audience today. We appreciate what both of you are doing to help our fellow citizens, help all of us make better decisions, understand how the country is thinking about issues, and hopefully that helps motivate each of us to do more learning ourselves and make wiser choices. Thanks very much to both of you.
Thank you. Good luck, Lucca.
Thank you. Great meeting you.
Polling offers a scientific approach to what the public thinks. What do you think about that, Rachel?
Well, as both of these pollsters mentioned, human beings are complex, with many varied influences on their decision-making. Polls require an important mix of both the liberal arts and sciences, and I like to remember that polling mostly just helps us feel connected, and that's such a human need. We want to know where we stand in relation to everyone else.
But it is interesting just how challenging it is to really understand what the American people are thinking. I can only imagine it was even more challenging for the Federalists when they were fighting for ratification. But I think it also shows, and their conversation really highlights, how vital elections are. These are the moments when we choose our leaders, but they're also the time when we choose the direction of our country. This is when we actively make the choice that Publius was talking about, the choice that self-government really is possible.
Right. And as we continue our journey in thinking about the role of reflection and choice plays in our constitutional system, don't forget that we'll be announcing our National Civics Teacher of the Year Award later in the program.
In the meantime, let's check back in with our Civics in a Civic team, Mary and Tony, and see where they are on their journey exploring the origins of our constitutional system in the roads of Washington, D.C.
It's Constitution Day, and what better way to celebrate than by driving around the DC area in a Civic, talking about civics.
I am always ready to talk civics, Mary.
I just want to say for your benefits that I do have a valid driver's license.
Americans, I think, have an instinctual love of liberty.
If you could declare war on any state, what would it be and why?
Back then, it would have been definitely Rhode Island.
Well, let's get back to the Constitution.
Yeah,
so
yes.
There were a lot of problems with the Articles. They come up with the Constitution. They've built in these principles that we now refer to as this. They're like these, put them on a pedestal, right? Like these things are in the document. But they argued a lot in creating the Constitution.
Yes, they did. I was going to say, hold on now, we're not at the constitutional principles yet, right? I mean, we have this long, hot summer in Philadelphia. I mean, 4 months. Don't want to open up any windows because, you know, then people outside would be listening into their secret convention. And they wanted secrecy not to hide anything from the public or what they were doing, but simply as a means of encouraging and fostering honest deliberation and discussion and allowing people to kind of backtrack on some thoughts and just have a free and open discussion, which is great. Madison's notes, we have this record of the convention by James Madison, and it's really a remarkable record where we get sort of a bird's eye view of all the debates and deliberation. I mean, they kept arguing about things and having to come back to it and not being resolved and coming back to it, still not resolved, and they had to deal with these very complex issues and you know had to take several breaks because the convention was at odds and it almost broke up several times.
Yeah, there's signs of these ideas and these arguments, I think, all around us, which I think is really cool. But I also really love that they were just mad at each other and arguing, because again, I really identify with that. I just think it's fun. You've got all these different people, different ideas, different priorities, and they're just like having it out in the Philadelphia summer, where it's like Philadelphia is a swamp, so it's hot as blazes. They've nailed the windows shut. It probably smells terrible in there. There's no deodorant back then.
And heavy woolen coats.
they're all just fighting, and it's just messy, and I think we forget about that. Like,
and at night they're drinking a lot, plenty of rum punch. Washington, of course, loves his Madeira and support, you know, and you know, that helps him, I think, restore a little conviviality. But there's still, there's a lot of tension, and you know, I think it adds to the human dimension of this, right? I mean, making of the Constitution, right? They weren't sort of men of marble. It was not an assembly of demigods, as I think it was Jefferson described it. I mean, there's 55 fallible, real human beings, right? There's all these little things when you study the convention that come out and really show them, I think, to be human beings engaged in a great endeavor. And I don't think we should let the great result kind of hide or obscure the very, very difficult road that it took to get there. Kind of like this very difficult road, which is very bumpy right now.
This, as you said, the founders would 100% identify with the road conditions in the Washington, D.C. area.
Exactly. I'm glad we're not in a wagon. We can pull up horses.
We've talked about the messy process of even getting the document. Then we have a document, we have the Constitution, it has to be ratified. So was everyone on board with it?
No, of course they weren't on board. Why would we expect everyone to be on board? I mean, right, so think about it, right? The Declaration, right? Not everyone was on board with that. There was a huge debate between, you know, Tories and Patriots. Even the Patriots are divided. Many didn't want to leave Great Britain. They just wanted the tax to end. 3 men who are even at the convention did not sign the document. George Mason here in Virginia, Ruggieri, and Edmund Randolph. I mean, they were there. Edmund Randolph introduced the Virginia plan, right, which sort of guided the entire convention, and yet he didn't even sign the document, right? And then Mason was this great sort of draftsman of liberty, and so, but they opposed the document for various reasons. They don't like the outcome, and there's a lot of opposition to the new Constitution. I mean, it's a really vigorous debate, right? And it allowed people to sort of, as our theme goes, sort of reflect and sort of refine and enlarge their views. But yeah, there was a huge debate between the Federalists, Anti-Federalists, and everyone in between.
I really like the idea that, I never thought about this before, that it took much longer for people to reflect on the final document and decide yes or no than the actual writing of it. It was actually a really long, drawn out sort of process. It's kind of...
And like I said, it takes the better part of a year. And on top of that, the Anti-Federalists are, many are so opposed, they actually want to hold a second convention.
What happens to the Anti-Federalists, to the people like Mason who don't want to sign it? Are they just bitter and forgotten?
You know, Madison pushes forward, and it appeases them. It shows that, I think, it shows the Anti-Federalists that the new government is really being set up to safeguard liberty, to engage in self-government, to allow the people to engage in self-government through their representatives. And, you know, I think slowly they come around, but, you know, they do sort of form an opposition party to the Washington administration, largely centered around Jefferson and Madison, who again sort of share that anti-federalist fear that maybe they're centralizing the government too much, especially Hamilton's financial plans and some other things. So there is sort of those lingering anti-federalist concerns into the 1790s, which caused our first party system.
Well, we are actually at Mount Vernon right now.
Can we go in? Can we take a little break?
I don't think I have enough cash to get into Mount Vernon. It's a little pricey. Wait. Well, you know what? I have on my, maybe they'll let me in for free because I have on my George Washington for President pin right now.
Well, what about me? Because I happen to have my George Washington socks on that I think everyone can see now. Can you see that? Yeah.
That's really unsafe.
There we go.
To get your foot
no,
on
no, I'm sorry. I got a little dirt on your dash there. But I'm sporting my G-Dub socks today, so we're good. I think we're gonna get free admission. Can I get a fist bump while we're driving? Keep at least one hand on the wheel.
I love Tony's point about them being 55 fallible human beings. It's easy to overlook that when we think on our history, that these men were just men, normal human beings whose circumstances led them to make decisions and chart the path of our country. It was us, human beings, who reflected and chose to ratify the new Constitution, form a new nation. And the role of individuals in shaping our country has never stopped. The way that BRI honors this activity is a new contest that recognizes young people making a difference in their communities today. The My Impact Challenge is the Bill of Rights Institute's civic engagement contest that rewards student service projects with cash prizes of up to $10,000. Launching nationally in 2021-22, this science fair for civics had 29 prize-winning entries representing 16 different states and has awarded over $75,000 in total prize money. The My Impact Challenge is unique in that it awards any service project aiming at solving a societal problem. The solution can be governmental, charitable, or a business. The key is real impact. My Impact Challenge is open to all students aged 13 to 19 who have not graduated high school and attend school in the United States, U.S. territories, or Department of Defense schools overseas. The My Impact Challenge offers up to $40,000 annually in total prizes with a grand prize of $10,000. In addition, we award 9 other student prizes, and supporting adults like teachers can win up to $500 because we know that many of these students don't do this alone. Up next, we want to share a short video with the winner of this year's My Impact Challenge, Carolyn Gao. Growing up in Albany, Oregon, Carolyn saw a great opportunity to help kids connect from different cultural backgrounds. So she rolled up her sleeves and she went to work. Gao created The World in Us, a nonprofit organization that to date has helped roughly 1,700 young people from 26 countries to promote cross-cultural education and understanding. She has now taken home the $10,000 grand prize in the Bill of Rights Institute 2023 My Impact Challenge. Here is Caroline and our colleague, Adam Brickley.
Thank you for joining us, Caroline, and congratulations on winning the grand prize in our My Impact Challenge. We are so excited to have you here, and we were really excited by your entry and what you're doing. So would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what your project was?
Of course. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Caroline. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from Oregon. My project was The World in Us, which is a nonprofit seeking to eliminate cultural ignorance and cultivate global citizenship through youth for youth education. And I actually started the initiative back in 2020, and since then we've run a variety of cultural education camps, virtual exchange programs, media initiatives, and other programs that seek to spark intercultural dialogue amongst young people. And we've been able to serve, since we began, around 700 youth across 26 countries.
And so what would you say inspired you to start your work?
One is my experience growing up here in Albany, Oregon. Is a fairly small town and not very diverse. And when I was growing up as a Chinese American, oftentimes I would just have comments that were kind of ignorant or hurtful, not necessarily intentionally, but just out of lack of education from my peers about my culture, about my food, about how I looked, things like that. And especially as a kid, that really harmed, I think, my sense of self-worth and belonging in a way that I don't think any kid should have to go through. I started to realize what a privilege it was that I got to be part of Chinese and American culture, that I've gotten the chance to go abroad, to learn different languages, and to really deeply engage with the full beauty and diversity of cultures that exist in our world. I wanted to prevent future generations from facing the cultural ignorance I did, and also give everyone the same opportunities that I've had to explore global cultures and enrich their own life and worldview through that cultural engagement.
That's really amazing. So what would you say that you've learned about citizenship through this process?
Through The World in Us, though, for one, I've realized how much progress my own community is making and how many people in this community are really fighting for a more inclusive future. And I think in one way that's helped me see that I belong in this community. And I think I've personally just felt much more engaged and much more close with my community as a citizen of my community, as a citizen of the US, and also just as a global citizen in this world that is so interconnected today. I feel a lot more connected to the communities that I would consider myself a citizen of. I think with this Well, with this challenge particularly and the way it framed my reflection on my work with the world and us, I think it honestly gave me a lot more appreciation for just how much like founding principles and civic virtues of the US are really ingrained in my own values and beliefs, and all the different cultural interactions I've gotten to have through the world and us with young people from other countries. It's also, I think, given me a greater sense of like pride and ownership in my own American citizenship. And yeah, I think it's helped me realize that a lot of kind of foundational American ideals are also kind of my own foundational ideals, and that's been a really cool realization.
Has anything really surprised you as you've done your work? Like what's been one of the biggest shockers?
Our education system, we do The World in Us runs a virtual exchange program for high schoolers around the world every summer, and each week we do different global issue workshops, and one of our like themes that we do workshops on and have discussions about is education. And we did our first program in like the summer of 2021. And of course, like no education system is perfect, and there's lots of things in the American education system that can be improved. But I think I never like realized how lucky I was to be in the American education system until I was talking with my peers from other countries. I guess I didn't realize how much of a privilege it was that I get to spend so much time on extracurriculars and passion projects like The World in Us, and get a lot of autonomy over which classes I get to take, and actually get to choose which classes I get to take, and have electives and things like that. While still acknowledging like all the things that need to be fixed in the American education system, I realized how lucky I am, and like the relative degree of freedom and autonomy that's given to students over how they shape their educational trajectory.
So my last question would be, what advice would you have to other people coming after you in community service and looking to apply to the My Impact Challenge?
First, with any community service project, think deeply about what issue it is that you want to solve, and about what resources, people, networks you're already tied into, and what kind of skill sets you have that, and then use those reflections to shape the strategy or approach you take to solving that issue, so that you are trying to solve the issue in the way that makes the most sense with your strengths and weaknesses. And then also, I think in general, it's important to just genuinely care about the issue you're trying to make an impact on. And of course, it was like this is like such an amazing program, and it's such an honor to like be rewarded. But ultimately, the purpose of your service should be to serve your community at its core. And I think having a genuine passion for the impact that you're making, regardless of what like external rewards you may or may not receive, or recognition you may or may not receive for that, I think is really important. And that way, when you do end up applying to something like the My Impact Challenge, I think your true passion for what you do will really come through. And I think that is also what will make your application more compelling, is having a genuine story behind what you're doing, and a clear vision of how you're going to continue driving forward that impact.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. Again, congratulations on the grand prize. And, we look forward to hopefully future partnership with you, and good luck on your future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Caroline's story is so inspiring, and it is really powerful to see the difference an individual can make, and how promoting community building can really make a difference.
So be sure to share the My Impact Challenge with any young person you know making an impact, or even one who wants to make them. At the Bill of Rights Institute, we really value those civic virtues that these projects exemplify. They're the habits that help build a healthy civil society. Habits like courage, respect, responsibility, integrity. Practicing these virtues facilitates our ability to live together, thoughtfully reflecting and choosing the path forward that best secures the common good.
In Federalist 1, Publius even kind of refers to this when he says, "It seems to have been reserved to the people of this country to decide, by their conduct and example, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government by reflection and choice." Their conduct and example is what he says will really make that decision known.
In all of our resources and programs, we try to highlight when we see great examples of these civic virtues, when we see individuals who exemplify them. One of those individuals is Medal of Honor recipient Flo Groberg.
Our colleague Stan Swim had a chance to sit down with Flo and discuss his background and how he came to serve our nation.
We're pleased to be joined today by Flo Groberg, a decorated veteran of our nation's armed forces, and someone who I think has a very unique story to share with us as we consider today's theme of reflection and choice. Flo, this wasn't the beginning of your journey, but certainly an important moment when you took an oath to join the armed forces of the United States to protect the Constitution against its enemies. And I wanted you, if you would, just to reflect on what that oath meant to you at the time and how your understanding of that oath has evolved today.
You know, back in 2008, at Fort Meade in Maryland, I took an oath to join the United States Army. And to me, that was one of the most important moments of my life, specifically because at that moment, it gave me the right to join our armed forces, but also to earn the right to call myself an American. As an immigrant, as a naturalized citizen, when my country, my newly adopted country is at war, the fact that I, as one of its citizens, was not involved in being a part of a solution, that didn't sit well with me. So I had to go earn it. I had to go earn the right to call myself an American, and that meant to join its armed forces and serve my nation. So raising my right hand was such an honor and a privilege. Fully understanding that I was now committing myself to a different life, that's for sure. But most importantly, that I was committing myself to something greater than just me. It's something that I look back at and, man, am I excited that I'd made that choice. It made me a man. It gave me a foundation that I live by and through today. And it also gave me the opportunity to challenge myself in ways that I don't think I could have ever challenged myself at.
Well, so let's go back a little further to where it did start. You shared that you weren't always here. Can you tell us a bit of your early story, and particularly some of those moments that may have shaped your character and helped you see something that made you want to be here?
Absolutely. I was born in France, and just at the outskirts of Paris. I lived there till I was 11 years old. I did have a stint in Spain for a year there. I'm adopted, which is a big deal for me because that meant that two individuals chose me to be their son. And I don't take that for granted. It means a lot to me. And that's something that throughout my life as a young man, when I found out, and later on as an adult, I paid really close attention to, because I wanted to make sure that those two individuals are always proud of me and what I bring to them and how I represent them, because they didn't have to pick me. They didn't have to raise me and go through all the things that they've gone through, specifically my mother. It gave me this mindset of I always need to be the hardest working person in the room because I need to earn it. Just the same mindset that I had about earning the right to call myself an American and taking that oath. But when I was 11, we had the opportunity to move to the United States. I didn't speak English, so coming here to the United States was definitely a change in culture. But it's something that I was incredibly excited about. The idea of moving here and getting to see even the yellow buses, things like we didn't have in France, that you only saw in movies or TV shows, was just super exciting for a young kid. And when I got here, obviously it was definitely a culture change, or probably the more accurate saying is a culture shock. Everything was bigger. I think everything moved slower. Coming from Paris to the outskirts of Chicago, the suburbs of Chicago and Palatine, Illinois, that was a shock. And of course, not speaking the language, but my father has always been a man of very few words, but a lot of direction, and very direct direction. He didn't hold my hand the way I guess you would expect a father to do so to a younger child, specifically through rough times. What he allowed me to do is to go jump right into things and fall on my face and learn the lessons from it. And some people might look back and say, whoa, that's really not cool. Like, why would your dad do that? Well, it's not like my dad just let me do it by myself. He would give me instruction and expect me to follow his instructions. But what he instilled in me at a young age is courage. Courage to go do things that are uncomfortable, to step outside my comfort zone. And so I started with being 11 years old, going to the pool. I'll never forget this. He told me to get out of the house. We had a duplex townhome, I guess. And he said, go to he gave me a card and he gave me instruction on how to get to the local pool, to walk there. And he expected me to go make friends. And I told him at that time, I said, look, man, like I don't speak this language. I don't know anyone. Why don't you come with me? And then he said to me, literally what I explained earlier, I'm not going to hold your hand the rest of your life. Sometimes you're going to have to take chances. You're going to have to go do things that that are a little bit difficult or make you feel uncomfortable, but that's how you're going to learn. So go figure out how to speak this language, meet some new friends, and then go be a kid. So I was really confused at that time, but that was a really important lesson that I remember to this day, because that was the first time in my life where I really felt like on my own and challenged. And it sounds so trivial to talk about going to the pool, but when you don't speak a language, and then you try to interact with a bunch of strangers in a foreign country by yourself at 11 years old, yeah, that's weird. So I did it, and I followed the instructions. I made friends that day. I think people were probably really intrigued with the fact that I spoke French and I didn't speak English, so like that's easy to make friends there. Or maybe they're making fun of me. I don't remember. Either way, I loved the pool. And I was a really good soccer player. So with those kids, we started playing soccer, and I made a lot of new friends. I went to French International School and then transitioned to American school. And in the American school, I was in English as a second language. And that's when I learned English rapidly, because when you're force-fed a language in an environment where you don't have any other choices but to learn rapidly, you learn rapidly. And that to me was one of those things, again, where I felt really uncomfortable, because I was in English as a second language for my English classes, but I was with every other kid in history, science, math, PE, whatever those courses are. All that really challenged me in ways that I think really paid dividend later on in life, specifically when I was in Afghanistan, because I was able to be exposed at an early age to multiple different cultures, multiple different languages. I was able to be put in an uncomfortable situation where you have to fit in. You have to find ways to fit in. But most importantly, you have to find ways to communicate. But probably the most important thing that happened in my childhood was in 1996, in February 1996, after we had just moved to Maryland. My uncle was killed by a terrorist organization called the GIA. My uncle was living in North Africa at the time, in Algeria, and he had just joined the military a few years prior, about 5-6 years prior, to go fight against this terrorist organization predecessor to Al-Qaeda, who had come into this North African, westernized type country where men and women drank. They went out to nightclubs. Women didn't have to wear any headscarf. They didn't want to. They can go study, whatever it was, right? It was just a westernized North African Arab country. And then these folks wanted to bring in Sharia law. And so on February 6, 1996, he was, during a ceasefire to observe Ramadan of all things, my uncle was attacked and he was killed. When that news was passed down to me the following day or so back here in the United States by my father, it sent shockwaves to my system, specifically because that uncle was my favorite person in the world outside of my parents. He's the one that I remember being 3 years old and going to the beach with, just hanging out with him, being in his arms. Always wanted to follow him, and probably really annoying. I kind of think of it now. Always wanted to be around him, and for those years, my early childhood years, he was who I wanted to emulate and be like. And so the fact that my favorite person, who was always the sweetest person to me, was now killed by other folks, and in the manner that he was killed, that I'd rather not share on this video, was atrocious, and it was horrible. That gave me a very early understanding and reality of the evil in this world, and that shaped my youth in a way that potentially wouldn't have happened because of that. And it made me realize at a young age that I more than likely was going to follow in his footsteps, also my father's footsteps, and join the military and fight those type of individuals. So, you're talking about being 12 years old and you already know in a way what you want to do. And then finally, the last piece, this is the icing on the cake, is I was naturalized on February 2001. 7 months later, 9/11 happens. And the same type of individuals that terrorized my family, killed my uncle, now have attacked my new adopted country and killed, thousands of my brothers and sisters. And so that was the final decision point. That was the it cemented my path at that moment. And I knew no matter what, I was going to join the military and be a part of that solution.
You've painted a really detailed picture of how your life experiences around you kind of formed and shaped your character. As you look back now as an adult, what kinds of things do you think young people need to learn? What kinds of values should they be seeking to incorporate into their character?
Well, I think the first one should be respect. Respect of, and not just, I love respect your elders, right? Because they have so much experiences. They're going to teach you something, right? No matter whether or not you want to hear it, they're going to teach you something that's incredibly valuable. And more than likely, I will say almost a guarantee, you will not understand that value until later on in life. You might pick it up on a thing or two, especially when you're young, but it's going to make a heck of a lot more sense later on in life when you're like, that's what she meant, or that's what he meant. Now I get it. And so I think respect is such a big thing that we believe we practice a lot of times. We believe that, that we are incredibly respectful individuals. But if you really take a step back and if you could replay some of your interactions, some of your thoughts, you're going to see that this is something that we always need to work on. The other one is integrity. I use this example as an easy one for people to digest, and that is when I ran track, I was a soccer player and I was a track athlete. Every Sunday was the day of recovery for a long run, not recovery. But it was the only day during the week that you didn't have organized practice. Majority of the time, right? Unless summers would get together. But this was a day where you could go with your teammates and go for a 15, 20-mile run. Or you could do it on your own. No one really checked in on you. But as my coach used to say, that day is the most important day of the week. Because that's the day where you're going to find out whether or not you want it. Because I'm not checking up on you. So you're going to have the integrity, self-integrity, and self-respect as well to go do the work when no one's watching. It's really easy. It sounds okay, all right, whatever, just go for a run. You're in college, you're young, right? Sometimes you just had a track meet or a cross-country meet the day before, so you're tired. And, you want to sleep in a little bit. It's Sunday, you deserve that, right? Well, you sleep until 9, and you get up, and your friends are here like, hey, let's go get some breakfast. You're like, no, I got to go run 15 miles. It's going to take me 2+ hours, right? Or 20 miles. And then you find an excuse not to do it. I didn't want to live like that. I had this mindset that if I don't do my run on Sunday, I'm not letting myself down. I'm not even letting just my coach down. I'm letting my team down. Because that means that I miss one of the most important key components of my success and the team's success. Because I decided to be lazy, or I decided to take a rest day when everybody else is working hard, right? And so, though that was probably the hardest things for me to do, I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, even if I went to sleep at 2. And so I got a little bit smart about that as years went on. But I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I would go on my 15 to 20-mile run. And every time I hated the start of that run. Never did I enjoy it, because I didn't enjoy running long distance. I was a middle distance, a mile or 2 mile. But every time I was done with that run, it made that Sunday amazing. That built discipline that played massive dividends later on in my life when I was in the military, when I went to Ranger School and I had, you're exhausted, you're tired, you're hungry, and you're supposed to be doing your part at 2 o'clock in the morning, taking a knee and covering your sector. And instead of taking a nap because no one's around to watch me, I had the same type of mindset that was trained through my years in college of, I'm going to do the right thing when no one's watching, because I know that if I don't, I'm going to let these folks down. I'm going to let my teammates down. Integrity, self-discipline are such important traits and character traits that I worked really hard on. And by the way, it's not like I said those words when I was doing them. It was just the motions. It was what made sense to me, or who I wanted to be as an individual. And I think the last piece is the respect also brought a respect towards the enemy in combat. Having respect for your enemy keeps you honest, also keeps you attentive, and it keeps you ready. it doesn't. It really kicks in, or kicks out, more accurately, complacency.
We've talked a lot about your choices and the things that have shaped that. As you've learned more about the history of your adopted country, are there any particular stories where others made choices that have been meaningful or inspiring to you?
First of all, going back to the beginning, to me, George Washington and the decisions that he made with, and bringing in the militia and being able to work against all odds, against an enemy force that it was overwhelming, but also did not have respect, right, against us. And so I think they underestimated us too often. But his leadership characteristics really, and the way he led and motivated folks and trusted some of his advisors in the way he operated, that gave me a really understanding and a clue of just the American spirit. We've always been, well, not anymore, but for the longest time, we were perceived as almost underdogs. Young country, people call us a little bit arrogant at times, full of ourselves. But one thing that we do better than anyone else is, my goodness, we are so darn patriotic. We are so patriotic. We're so patriotic that when we're not in a conflict, we start fighting against each other. And so you kind of look at 9/11, you look at, heck, go back to 1941, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. And then you kind of look at that country. We were probably, when the World War II started, I always mess these numbers up, so you can fact check me later, but the 33rd world power on the military side at the time, maybe a little bit, maybe top 30, but we were really, we weren't doing too well. And by 1942, a year after Pearl Harbor, we're number 2. This country overnight, after we were attacked, just flipped a switch and put all of our differences aside. Forget the Great Depression. It was all about making sure that whoever attacked us paid the price. They say awakening a sleeping giant is that saying right there. But the reality is, what it did is it gave us the negative situation, forced us to ally with each other, to start respecting each other and working with each other on a common goal. And when the Americans do this, we are absolutely, without a doubt, second to none, unstoppable. It is the way when we fought against the British Empire, that is what we walked. That is how we did it. We took the hard route. We did the unthinkable to beat one of the world power at the time. And that's something that I look back, and then you go from the stories that we have in this nation. I work for the Boeing company, but Boeing to Martin Luther King, to Reagan and what he did during the Cold War. And these are really important. His speeches that he made that I watch all the time, because they're so motivating, but impactful, but also make so much sense of the situation at the time. But now you go back and you listen to these speeches, and they still make sense today with what we're facing and the threats we're facing. I didn't want to get really into more military folks, but I'm a history buff. Doolittle's, the fact that I'm even in the same society as Doolittle and Audie Murphy is absolutely completely ludicrous and crazy to me, because there's no way that I could ever put myself in the same sense as these warriors. But it's fascinating that there's so many points of motivations throughout our history that have made me so proud to be an American, but also, more importantly, giving me a lot of reasons to make sure that I never took a day off.
Flo, you've said a lot of inspiring things here, and just your example of service to our country, for which we thank you, is inspiring in itself. Not everybody is going to have the same opportunity as you did to serve the nation in that particular way. What would you encourage young people to do? How would you encourage them to serve one another in their community to help make the country stronger?
One, the first thing that I would say that's really important, you're probably not going to expect me to say that, and as these young individuals who are watching this video, probably not going to expect me to say that, is learn the art of listening. I think listening to each other, don't even do any community service. I don't really care. Don't even join any other organizations. Don't join the military. It's okay. If you just worked on listening to other people and being compassionate enough to hear them out without bringing upon judgment or your own judgment upon them, and by being just a little bit curious of why they're thinking a certain way, we'd live in such a better world. We have lost the appetite to listen to each other attentively. We seem to always want to inject our own thoughts and comments and voice and beliefs into each other, and we're no longer capable of taking a step back and absorbing what someone else potentially different of opinion is all about. And so, of course, I want you to go out there and serve your community as best as you can. And things that you're passionate about. It can be painting a home, or working in a homeless shelter, or going to a children's hospital and reading books to kids, or picking up trash on the side of the road. Absolutely. But why don't we just go back to the basics and let's learn to listen to each other again? My goodness, if we could just do that, things would turn around so much faster. And this animosity that we're feeling, and not just in our country, you got to start opening up and look at the world, what's happening around the world as well, would more than likely dissipate a little bit, just because we would just, in this case, act more like how we're supposed to act as human beings and respectful members of society.
Is there anything else that you want to say, or have I kind of given you the right chances to get that out?
I'm absolutely grateful and humbled that this country gave me the opportunity to serve its nation, wear its colors, and most importantly, lead and be led by some of the finest men and women that I've ever met. And that's something I don't take for granted. So as an immigrant, I appreciate the fact that I can call myself an American. And I just hope that everyone who is American can take a step back and really appreciate how lucky we are, and how blessed we are.
Flo, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stan.
Flo's background and influences were so powerful, and learning how his character was shaped is really moving. I thought his comments about respect were especially important, and he is right. It's something we can continue to work on. And integrity, that one can be so hard to maintain in modern society, but something we can all relate to, though I have never run 15 miles. Integrity is maybe the virtue that all others rest on in establishing and maintaining a healthy civil society. It's one of those habits that helps us contribute to our families and our communities, that encourages us to do our part and support those around us, even when we might not want to. And how much, too, do we have to think about the importance of listening? Flo's remarks on how our reflection on events in our community is really important because the decisions our communities make impact all of us. By doing that reflecting is an action, and it takes practice. To facilitate that, our personal reflection is also important. Personal reflection is what helps us deliberate about our actions, make personal choices, and helps shape us as individuals and communities. And the Bill of Rights Institute works with over 70,000 teachers across the country, so when Flo mentioned a few important teachers he had in his life, that really resonated with us. There's so much we can do to listen and learn from each other, not just on Constitution Day, but every day. And it's our teachers who play a critical role in facilitating this in our communities. Be sure to stick around later in the program as we honor our Civics Teacher of the Year. At the Bill of Rights Institute, we highlight the practice of these civic virtues through the lives of different individuals from throughout our history. And we've just updated one of the resources that does this, one of my favorite resources, Heroes and Villains. To tell us more about this exciting update, let's check in with our colleague, Michelle Easley.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Easley, the Learning Designer for Digital Education Projects at the Bill of Rights Institute. I'm excited to share an updated version of our popular resource, Heroes and Villains. Some of you might have already used it, and some of you may be hearing about it for the very first time. Regardless, you may be thinking, well, what makes this resource useful to my learning? First, Heroes and Villains avoids shallow topics. inviting teachers and students to dive into robust history-based issues relevant to their daily lives. Through rich narratives, critical questions, meaningful discussions, and personal applications, teachers and students examine the civic virtue assumptions of our founders and their relevance today. If you've used Heroes and Villains before, you may wonder, well, what makes this version different? Let's take a closer look and find out together. Here's the homepage for Heroes and Villains. You can find it by typing Heroes and Villains in the search bar or by using the resource tab. Through storytelling, this resource explores 24 narratives of individuals that made an impact on history. Some of these individuals are more famous, like John Brown, Dwight Eisenhower, and Frederick Douglass, while others might be new to you. We added 4 new narratives, including Huey Long, William Stoughton, James Armistead Lafayette, and Clara Barton. Each lesson pairs a historical figure with a civic virtue or vice that they demonstrated. Virtues are good habits like honesty, respect, and justice. These civic virtues promote self-government and help guarantee that communities orient themselves toward a common purpose. Let me ask you, what happens to a republic if virtue is not practiced? In a nation founded on constitutional principles such as individual liberty and the consent of the governed, civic virtue must be central to all civic education. Indeed, to teach civic virtue is to help preserve our republic by developing students' character. At the Bill of Rights Institute, the ideas and ideals of the Constitution are at the heart of our work. This is why we updated Heroes and Villains, to reinvigorate the teaching of civic virtue based on primary sources, grounded in critical thinking, and focused on history. Let's look through one of the lesson plans to demonstrate how it all works. Here's one of our new lessons, which focuses on James Armistead Lafayette and the virtue of courage. Armistead was a Black American Revolutionary War spy for the Patriot cause who demonstrated immense courage. This lesson asks students to explore the virtue of courage by engaging with the story of James Armistead. Students consider this essential question: how does the maintenance of liberty and equality depend on individuals acting courageously? To thoughtfully answer this question, the lesson requires students to read and analyze a narrative that explores how James Armistead Lafayette acted courageously throughout his life. It also asks students to use their historical literacy skills to analyze primary source images. And it even provides reflection activities for students to make connections between the history and practicing the virtue of courage in their daily lives. And each lesson provides reflection activities for the students to make connections between the history and practicing the virtue of courage in their daily lives. The resource also provides teacher supports to help connect history and civic virtue. We provide background information on the meaning and importance of teaching civic virtue and a thought activity for educators. It is designed for you to engage with the information that is most helpful to your teaching. And lastly, each lesson includes cross-curricular connections that expand the learning outside the history classroom. After walking through some of the highlights, I hope you are as excited as I am about this updated resource. Heroes and Villains is meant to help students think about the importance of civic virtues and practice using them for themselves and their community. On behalf of everyone at BRI, thank you and happy Constitution Day.
I am really excited about this new update, and the new characters bring with them new perspectives on our virtues and vices. We've also added more scaffolding and support for differentiated learners and improved our overall lesson design. In addition, we've created 9 videos that highlight our civic virtues and deepen engagement with the lesson content. I really hope you'll check it out. You know, another aspect of reflection and choice that we have not discussed is, well, talking. Talking about issues with our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers are vital in a democracy. Our self-governing system depends on our ability to thoughtfully engage and speak with one another. Practicing civic virtues helps with this and promotes good civil discourse. But civil discourse itself is a habit we can practice. One of our colleagues, Joe Schmidt, recently co-wrote a book on civil discourse. Let's check in with him and his co-author, Nichelle Pinckney, as they discuss civil discourse and its role in our constitutional society.
Welcome, everybody. Happy Constitution Day. We're here to talk about civil discourse, the Constitution, and what it means to you. My name is Joe Schmidt, and I am the Director of Teacher and Student Programs for the Bill of Rights Institute.
Hi, I'm Nichelle Pinckney, and I am a Curriculum Director for Social Studies and World Languages in a large district in Texas.
And we are both the co-authors of a book called Civil Discourse, Classroom Conversations for Stronger Communities. And so I guess with that lead in, we'll start right off. Nichelle, so when you think about civil discourse, since as my colleague Rachel likes to say, we literally wrote the book on civil discourse because that's the title. What is civil discourse to you?
I would say that it is the communication of listening, speaking, and writing respectfully amongst people in society.
I think that respectful part is a key idea that I think gets lost in sometimes. Because I think we definitely have to share ideas, right? Like, I think that's the discourse part of it. Civil is also a key part of that. So then why is it important? Why do we have to have both civil and discourse? Besides some of the obvious, but let's talk about that for a second.
Well, I think we live in a polarized world, unfortunately. And I think a lot of things that we discuss within the K through 12 and even higher ed, I would even argue in higher ed, there are so many ideas and perspectives about what's going on around us in our world that to understand it, you have to have that discourse. But to also deeply understand it, it also has to be, like we said, civil. I grew up in a small town, so if I didn't, when I went away to college in a big city, if I didn't have the skill set to be able to listen to others and understand, I don't know how successful I would have been. I lived amongst, I went to a women's college, and living amongst women from different backgrounds, different countries, different economic backgrounds, different family nucleus, like all those different things allowed for me to grow and have discourse because they had different experiences and different lived experiences.
I like that. I was working with Dr. Diana Hess. She's the Dean of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she wrote a book that I know we talk about in our book called Controversy in the Classroom. And when she was speaking, it was the first time I heard her say this, but it was really like impactful for me. She said, you know, when we're engaging in these conversations, I'm not trying to change your opinion, but I am trying to change your mind. And the idea that I'm trying to, like, in your mind is, are you open-minded to the conversation that we were having? And so there's changing the opinion, and then the changing of the mind is, are you at least willing to hear me out, to have that open mind? I was like, wow, I never thought about it that way, because she made that distinction about, you know, the mindset that you need to have a conversation. And that was one of my takeaways listening to her talk recently, was the, wow, you know, are you open to having your mind changed? But that doesn't necessarily mean your opinion. And I know we oftentimes use those words interchangeably. We're like, oh, I want to change your mind. But she said, well, I just want you to have an open mind. And are you willing to change that mindset? I was like, oh, I think that's pretty good. Because I think that is what we need sometimes. I know I've had discussion with people where we talk about, you know, a conversation can be a sharing and comparing of ideas. I love to use them because they rhyme. Sharing and comparing of ideas, that doesn't mean we have to win something. I don't need to convince you. And I think, you know, if we're talking about the politicized world that you were talking about, you know, can you just imagine a world where people who vote for different politicians can still just share ideas about, like, why do you believe that, without the idea of, I'm talking to you to try to change your opinion? I think would definitely be a different place in our communities.
Yeah, I think so. I think about the years I taught government and taught AP government, and how I really wanted to model that in my classroom, like having an atmosphere of we may not all go to the polls and vote a certain way, but we all understand, whether we agree or disagree, we all understand that there's another way to look at an issue or a topic or a candidate in a different view. And that was really important in where I taught, because it was a large single ticket voting area, if the people in the area even voted. So then this idea of, if I'm going to vote, and then when I vote, I'm just going to go vote straight ticket, because I don't really want to, I didn't even learn about anybody, right? And so then this idea of really changing a culture or mindset of students really wanting to engage.
I like that the point you make about like voting single ticket, and you know the idea of there's two parties or multiple parties, but I know today we have two major parties, and George Washington famously wrote about, right, like we should not have these political parties. And the Federalist Papers, we write about the worry about factions. And I know the Bill of Rights Institute, we have a series that we call Constitutional Conversations, where we talk about some contentious ideas or concepts that really have spanned time, whether it's from 1787 till today, or maybe throughout history. And one of the things I like to mention is, I think that the founders, and if we're thinking about the writing of the Constitution, because it is Constitution Day here, everybody, happy Constitution Day, that I think they made some really respectful decisions, at least in terms of the idea that there's no way to write a perfect document across time, that there was going to have to be a need for continued conversations, for amendments, for the different ways, right? A court system that would interpret the laws. And so that's one thing I like to highlight, that there has been tension in the Constitution ever since it was written, even before it was written, right? Federalists, anti-federalists. And I don't think that that's a glitch in the Constitution. I think that's a feature. And I think it's a feature that we need to take advantage of by being able to have the conversations about what's going on in our country today. What do we need? What do we value? And I'm wondering what you think, or how you would approach the idea of civil discourse and teaching the Constitution today.
I'm so happy that you said the idea that when the process of writing it and when writing it, they already knew that it wasn't perfect. Okay. They knew that. That's why the discussions were being had. That's why they had to go through everything to even get the Bill of Rights in there. Like all these processes, like, so if we do this, then we'll do this, like all the negotiations and the compromises. They knew that it wasn't perfect. They knew that it excluded groups. They knew that it didn't include groups. Like all of these things they knew, but because they were preparing something that they didn't even know. Like, what is this going to look like? I saw a Broadway play not too long ago, the 1776 one, and it was interesting because I've taught this for years and looked at it, but seeing this version, which is completely different, was like okay, another perspective, another view, another idea. So I think it's important as you teach the Constitution for students to understand that there was some civil discourse right there. If you want to talk about beginnings of civil discourse before they even started fighting, before they even got into that room, as like they say in Hamilton, the room where it all happened, they had all this discourse before, whether it was side things and all this, to come together to come up with this document that was going to guide a country that they didn't even know that they had intents to last, but they didn't know how long it would last. I almost think sometimes, like, wonder what they would think now. Looking at things, would it be positive? Would it be negative? What would Washington say about our faction/political parties? Would he even say, I told you so? Or would he, like, this idea of really having those discourse? And that is, I just think it's important when you talk about how this was written. Like, they had to have this. And it may have looked different, but they had to have had it. The discussions were brought up. The discussions were brought up of what we were going to keep in and what we weren't going to put it, even mention. Like that had to been had.
That reminds me, I used to run a mock constitutional convention when I was in the classroom. And as we would go through it, I actually had one year a student formed a political party. And what they had to do is their assessment was in a Google Doc where they had to take notes. They had to reference the motions that were made. How did they vote? How did the discussion go? Kind of like Madison's notes, right, of the real Constitutional Convention. And this one young man, he kept making really, really lengthy motions. And people would say, hold on a second, it's too long, as they're typing away. He said, well, if you join my political party, I will give you access to my Google Doc so that they could copy paste everything over, right? As time went on, he got more and more people in his political party. And when they got a majority of the class, they voted to remove me, George Washington, as president of the convention. And so I went out and sat out in the hall, right? And then all chaos reigns. People are yelling, you can't do this, you can't have this. And so then word spreads throughout the school, like the other government hours, you need to try it. And I would tell future years about it. Like I became really open, like this happened once. And it was the best discussion we ever had because it raised the point. We just assume that because in 1787, these people got together, wrote a constitution that, well, of course it was destined to work because it did. And for me, I like to highlight, like, there was no guarantee when everybody got in the room that they would reach an agreement, that they would have a document, that what they made would work, right? We had just come out of the Articles of Confederation, which did not work and had to be readdressed again. And so I loved that example. Everybody thought the system had fallen apart in the classroom when a political party rose up and had me removed. But it was the greatest example of how imperfect everything really was, even as they were striving for a perfect situation, that there was no guarantees that it would work. And I like what you had said, right? That all these discussions were had, but right, it was famously, they had to close the windows, so they could have these open and honest conversations, even though it was the stifling Philadelphia summer. So Nichelle, what do you think about, I'm thinking about those open and honest conversations. Today, are we able to have those open and honest conversations? If we're thinking about celebrating the Constitution, those writers knew the importance of those conversations. How does that translate today?
I think people know the importance of the conversations. I just think that there are so many other factors that hinder those conversations. So, like, you and I talk about this all the time when we meet with people, like the idea of setting up guardrails, like this idea of, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your other opinions. But so to ensure that every voice is being heard in this situation, here are a few things that should go into play. So I think a lot of people, and I'm even not talking like just in classroom settings. I'm talking about when you're sitting around, Labor Day weekend's coming around. I'm Southern, so there's barbecue and all that. Like this idea that we're going to come around and if we're going to have this discussion, I need to know, like, hey, Joe's going to come in there with this information. So what are my guardrails? Like, I'm not going to talk to Joe about this, but we can talk about this, and this. We do it all the time. We just don't call it guardrails and we don't look at it the way that we are talking about it in the text or different things like that. I think everyone knows that the conversations need to be had. I just think what's happened in the past few years is those conversations look different. They've gotten a little heated because the guardrails aren't there, or because that understanding of, I'm here to not change that person's mind. Like you said earlier, like Miss Hess told you, I'm not here to change their mind. I just want you to have an open mind. You can still leave here today and say, I don't agree with anything Nichelle said, but it was nice to hear it. And I felt heard, even if you didn't agree, and vice versa. So I think people know that it's important. I think they know that this is how our country grows. I just think the guardrails haven't been set, and it's just so many ways to make it difficult.
How can we use then Constitution Day if we're thinking about teachers in classrooms across the country, looking at the Constitution, listening to this segment right now? How do we help those teachers and those students then get ready for either a classroom discussion or that after graduation discussion out in the quote unquote, the real world people talk about? How do we help with those guardrails if we feel like they're not there as much?
I'm a huge proponent of social studies in elementary. So I think it starts early as kindergarten, right? Um, I think Constitution Day. Now, should I sit there and tell a kid we have a Constitution at kindergarten and all this? No, but we start building this love of civics and this love of this document that's going to guide us throughout our career as early as kindergarten. So we start then, and I think it scaffolds up. So I would not have the same conversation that I would have with a group of sixth graders, the same conversation with a group of ninth graders. So that's my first thing. But I guess I have that view as a curriculum director, like don't use the Constitution Day activity for sixth grade and um, 10th grade, because it's different people, different ages, different understanding. So that's the first thing. So starting as early as kinder, I would have these conversations. Second of all, I would also look at what does the Constitution look like to different levels. So, for instance, and maybe grade band, and I know Bill of Rights has things where they can utilize. So we're going to look at components of the Constitution, and we're not saying the whole thing, but if I'm just looking at the preamble at one level, and we're really dissecting what each one of those words mean, and then I think, also I'm a huge proponent of transparency and opening the doors of our classrooms. And so the idea of sending it home prior to Constitution Day, so um, we're going to talk on in September. We're going to talk about the Constitution. In our great state, it's a whole week, and some other places it's a day. So sending it home previously. This is what we're going to talk about. Here's some questions you can ask your student about. Here's a reading about the information that we're going to talk about. So now you've opened up the communication beyond just your classroom. And some of the things that we assume other people know and they may not know. So if I send a reading home, here's the reading we're going to read about the Constitution. Here's the blurb we're going to study. Here are the guiding questions that we have that we'll be asking your students. It's changing, like I say, changing the story of what's going on in my classroom versus what others think.
And I know, I love to prompt you to go back. You have the best story about a classroom constitution, classroom agreements, classroom contract, whatever term you want to call it. You have the best story because of your signing day. Can you talk about how you took some of those ideas of agreeing how we were going to live together and you used that in setting up your classroom?
I love telling this story because now looking back on it, it was a success. When I initially were doing it, I don't know how successful I thought it was going to be. Just like our framers of the Constitution, right? Like I thought it went well. So my first year teaching, I didn't have great classroom management. Pretty much I was about the same age as my students, maybe 3 years older than them. And so I struggled really with classroom management. And I remember reading, we were going into John Locke, and I was like, oh, maybe a social contract theory. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I could pull that off, right? And so and then I read the Harry Wong book. And so I was trying to do this, but tie in standards, what we're talking about, and what Harry said, because I was like, I'm going to quit soon. And so that's how the signing day comes about. So the first initial time we do this, we just built the classroom contract like most people do. We're going to set up our ideas and our rules, and we just put it up. Well, then I saw that the buy-in wasn't as good. And so the second year, I was like, my campus kept doing the signing day for athletes, right? And I was teaching AP, so none of those kids were signing to go play sports anyway. So I was like, I'm going to make a big deal about how we're learning how to work together and all this. And so that's the signing day concept came from that. And so what we did was we came together and said, this is how our classroom is going to work. I want to say it was close to an election year. It was an election year. So we were going to have these discussions. We are going to talk about things, but how are we going to do that? And then I told my principal, I'm going to I want the kids to sign and I want you to come. Like this is going to be a big deal. And he was like, you want me to come? Yes. And I want the coaches to come, and I want all these people to come, because I was trying to get the buy-in from outsiders as well as what I'm asking them to do. They're agreeing to it. And so it just blossomed from there, where it was literally like a thing I did when I taught AP government, when I moved to US history, when I taught world geography. It just changed differently on how we did it, but it was a big deal, signing and everything, and the students owned it. And it was like kids were like, "Oh, signing day's coming up," right? When they would come to my class the following year, my sister told me about your signing day. It was pretty cool. But initially, I don't know if I knew that it was going to be that great. It was just a way to get kids involved initially.
Well, I think there's so much freedom, like liberty in students. Like you'd think it would be the opposite of, well, let's sit down and come up with a bunch of rules. But I think if you have the buy-in, it's so different. And I know that for me, the story I like to tell is, we would set up our agreements for how we were going to have our conversations. And then we would agree to it. I didn't have the signing day. I wish I had the signing day. It's such a great thing. And we would talk about like how we did. So at the end of a discussion, and we, students would say, "Oh, well, we promised not to talk over each other, but we were talking over each other." And I had one group that, I kind of let it run. I let them give the feedback on how to do it. And one group said, "Mr. Schmidt, we are struggling with our agreements. Will you they said, will you yell at us more?" And I was like, "Okay, hold on a second. I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly." And they're like, "Yeah." They're like, "We are struggling with this. We want you to help us better understand." And at the Bill of Rights Institute, we spend so much time talking about, the liberty that comes with self-governance. And for me, it's such a good example. The students, it wasn't a set of rules that they had to follow. It was things that they agreed were best for them. And that gave them like ownership of what it was. And so when they wanted to, quote unquote, be yelled at more, that wasn't that wasn't a heavy handed, you need to be quiet and listen in my classroom. That was them recognizing that is how they needed support. And so I always love that example. Like if you go in on day one and you yell at kids, and yeah, you can yell at them, you can get them to be quiet. But that buy-in that you talked about, and for me, it was that example of students understanding the support they needed. They used the word yell at us, but I don't think they saw it as a negative. They saw it as what they needed to thrive in that form of self-governance, right? We thought we could do it this way, but it turns out we need some support in there as well. And I think that that's something that we both agree on, that allowing students to have the say in how the room will run, you will get that buy-in. I think you're actually going to get a lot more of what you want out of it as a teacher by including the students in those discussions. Closing thoughts.
Since how we're celebrating Constitution Day, I would say we like to say this all the time, jump in, jump in and allow students to see like we talked about earlier, like the role that conversations and discourse and understanding others' backgrounds and where they came from allowed for such a strong document to be made, even if certain groups were not initially represented. There was still conversation about every last one of those groups that weren't represented, even though they didn't make it in initially and all that. The conversations were had, the discussions were had, even provisions were made for different ones if you look at it historically, but celebrate this document that our founders thought, hey, it's going to be a foundation that can grow and be better, because I think that's what they thought. It's going to grow. It's going to get better. They're going to add to it. Like they had a whole process for it for a reason.
Well, Nichelle, as always, I appreciate your time. I always feel like I get smarter every time we talk, and we talk a lot. So that's always such a great thing. It's Constitution Day. I'm glad that you were able to give us some time today. I feel like we're all a little bit smarter because of that. Some great insights on civil discourse with the founders. We're talking about the Constitution. I think there's so many key things, not only back in 1787, but are relevant all the way through today. So I want to thank you for giving up some of your time. And I'll just close by saying Happy Constitution Day.
Thank you.
The mindset to be open-minded is such a good insight. Flo talked about that too. Really listening can be such a difficult thing to do, and reflecting and choosing isn't about getting everyone to fully agree. Joe mentioned continuing conversations, and the Constitution is truly designed to facilitate productive national conversations. It's designed to continue this process of reflection and choice. When Nichelle says most people want to have these conversations, it's true. But those discussions can be powerful, but they're difficult. It takes practice and an intentional approach. Rules help shape discussion, and that's how the Constitution functions. It's a document that shapes the conversations our government has. It gives us the parameters to guide our discussion about topics that we need to come to full agreement on. Nichelle's concluding thoughts about it growing and getting better really centers on our theme for the day. We have so many periods that challenge us to grow and get better, and maybe none is a better example than the Civil War. Let's go back to our colleague Tony Williams as he concludes his discussion with scholar Andrew Lang.
For this special episode of Scholar Talks on Constitution Day Live, the guiding question is, why is it important for Americans to have conversations about contested ideals? And how does Lincoln's expression of American democratic ideals in the Gettysburg Address, what does that tell us about American exceptionalism during the war?
There is no better explication of American exceptionalism prior to 1863 or since 1863 than the Gettysburg Address, though I suppose the Declaration of Independence would be a close contender. Without the Declaration, of course, Lincoln could never write the Gettysburg Address, and that's kind of his point. In 272 words and 2.5 minutes, Lincoln expressed the entire concept of American nationhood better than anybody. Lincoln is, in the Gettysburg Address, explaining what he always explained, and that is that the generations are bound to one another in American history and American life. As he said several months prior to Congress in December of 1862, we cannot escape history. And that was his message at Gettysburg, that the nation that was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal is now being tested. The nation from history is being tested in real time, and people, largely without their own consent, have found themselves in the middle of this testing. And it is those brave men who here gave their lives on the field at Gettysburg that have demonstrated the extent to which each generation must recommit and rededicate itself to this simple but abiding moral proposition that all people enjoy natural rights that are protected within a constitutional structure. And I think that he's reminding us that democracy is precarious, it is not inevitable, it is delicate, but it's also powerful. It encompasses all. It excludes nobody, at least in its perfected state. And as he said, I think this is connected way back to what he said 6 years previously in his retort to the Dred Scott decision. I feel like you can read Lincoln's response to Dred Scott and Gettysburg in tandem, and he's saying the same thing in such a powerful way. He's talking about how the American regime evolves and expands and grows over time if we allow its logic to expand and grow. And here's what he said. They, meaning the founders, meant simply to declare the right so that the enforcement of it might follow as fast as circumstances should permit. They meant to set up a maxim for free society, which should be revered by all, familiar to all, constantly looked to, constantly labored for. And even though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence, augmenting the happiness and value to all people of all colors everywhere. It's that idea that's being tested on the fields of battle by 1863. And Americans have a choice. We can either recognize what is objective, what is true, what once was, in Lincoln's words, a consensus, or we can reject it. Confederates had rejected it, explicitly, proudly so. They were attempting to build an alternative nation on the exact same soil that had once been conceived and dedicated for a particular purpose.
So how did the North and South view the challenges of Reconstruction through this lens of American exceptionalism?
Yeah, Reconstruction, one of the most complex, complicated, and misunderstood aspects of all American history. Just because the United States wins the Civil War and just because emancipation is institutionalized in the 13th Amendment in 1865, in no way means that this conflict, this contest over American exceptionalism is over. If anything, it just escalated. You know, if we look at the Reconstruction South, what do we see by the end of 1865? It's not explicitly the reconstitution of the old slaveholding order, but it's something pretty close. Southern states have authored black codes which restrict, curtail, limit the freedom, the mobility, the opportunity of freed people. You have the President of the United States, Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, overtly blessing the reestablishment, or I should say the maintenance, of white political supremacy in the American South. And you have Republicans saying, all right, well, look, this war has to mean something, right? Union and emancipation have to mean something. And I'm simplifying a very complex set of issues here. But ultimately, what Republicans say is you cannot have freedom, i.e. emancipation, left undefined. Freedom has to be tied enduringly to liberty, right? The liberties protected and safeguarded in the Constitution. And so the 14th and 15th Amendments, much like emancipation itself, are unintended, unanticipated, contingent outgrowths of the Civil War, but their logic is rooted in something from the American past. The architects of the 14th Amendment said that what we are doing is embedding in the Constitution explicitly as we can, the principles of the Declaration of Independence. But here's the problem. Here's what ultimately happens. How do you enforce something so self-evident when there's so much white Southern resistance to something like the 14th and 15th Amendments? What you need is a strong, centralized, active government to enforce these provisions, to enforce these ends. And what ultimately transpires during the 1870s is an emergent critique, not from the Democrats, they're already critiquing this, but a critique among some Republicans, opponents to U.S. Grant, even within his own party, who are saying, if we have a strong, centralized, militant enforcement wing, then have we not transformed into the central states of Europe? And ultimately, what brings down Reconstruction is the Supreme Court, white violence in the South, and ambivalent Republicans who are all saying that the United States has gone too far, both in its racial reformation of the American South and its constitutional rehabilitation.
Now, American ideals have always been contested and debated. Andrew, how can history teach us maybe perhaps to find some common ground, moderation, through deliberation, civil conversation, building consensus? I know that the lessons of history are fraught, but can the failures that led to Civil War, can they maybe teach us to do a little better?
Yeah, I mean, it's the great question for our time, and I think what I want to do in first answering that question is to allow us in the 21st century a bit of grace and humility, and by that I mean let's recognize that we do live in a politically rancorous time. There is real political division, but let's also recognize that we are not at a time where we are more divided than ever before. History should teach us that. We should understand how and why our times today are at once similar, but also very different from those times in the past. Maybe not better, maybe not worse, but they're different. History requires humility, context, the ability to see things not in an A-B binary. But let's look at the gray areas. And let's recognize that at the end of the day, In order for the American constitutional experiment to work, you used a really important word that I think has been lost, both from our political culture and our lexicon, and that is consensus. I don't mean consensus on the real granular details. I mean consensus on really basic facts. What was the American founding? What is the purpose of American political institutions? What is not the purpose of American political institutions? What are the privileges but also limits bestowed upon electoral majorities? What are the protections but also the restraints imposed on electoral political minorities? These questions matter. And it seems to me that in many cases in our modern political life, these issues have been obscured. In order for this entire experiment to work, it's incumbent upon us. I mean, that's what Lincoln said at Gettysburg, right? It is rather for us, the living, to engage in the great unfinished work of those who passed on the fields at Gettysburg. I am in no way suggesting that war is the answer to our political solution or our political problems. It's not. But Lincoln was right that it's up to us. It is we who live in a political moment who have responsibility to deal with our problems in a civil manner, as long as there is a consensus that governs our political debate.
Andrew Lane, that's a wonderful note to end on. I hope we can achieve it. And I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you all for joining us on this special episode of Scholar Talks. Happy Constitution Day.
It is up to us to deal with our political challenges. That's a really powerful idea. Andrew's assertion about the delicate nature of democracy, for me at least, is a real call to action. You can see in Lincoln's remarks, he called out the role of all of us in standing up for just government. Andrew's remarks also show the real challenges the nation faced and worked to overcome in pursuing equality of all. The idea of freedom being tied to liberty, or the liberties protected in the Constitution, is again a really powerful idea and one worth reflecting on. We are free, but that freedom is only maintained insofar as we use it to protect the rights of others. Andrew's comments about studying history with humility really echo what Joe and Nichelle were talking about. Studying our past really requires we carefully listen and work to understand the events that took place and why they are important. History can also give us helpful context to better understand how we arrived where we are today. Speaking of history and our past, let's check back in with Mary and Tony as they conclude their trip around the roads of D.C., exploring the story of our constitutional republic.
So there were a lot of problems with the articles.
They kept arguing about things and having to come back to it.
I love that they were just mad at each other and arguing. It probably smells terrible in there.
Probably.
There's no deodorant back then.
3 men who are even at the convention did not sign the document.
We are actually at Mount Vernon right now.
Can we go in? Can we take a little break?
I don't think I have enough cash to get into Mount Vernon. It's a little pricey. I think that we should do a lightning round.
Okay.
Favorite founder?
I mean, I would say Alexander Hamilton, right? Because, because of the musical and because, he's I do love Hamilton. I do. So, do you love Hamilton?
Yeah. I mean, I know this is gonna get me canceled. I do like Hamilton. He's not my favorite founder.
Okay, so apparently you haven't read my book. I'm gonna say I don't have a bobblehead. I kind of wish I did, but can I offer this bust of the father of our country? Yeah, George Washington. I'm going to say he's my favorite founder.
He's my favorite founder.
Is this supposed to be a lightning round? Because I feel like I'm not
moving
along very fast.
This is more like a tropical
Yeah,
depression.
can I, maybe I'll leave George on my shoulder. Okay. So he'll drive too.
All right.
He's going to ride shotgun.
What did George Washington think of the Constitution? Was he yay or nay on it?
He was definitely a yay. He's the president of the convention. Doesn't say a whole lot, but he doesn't need to, right? His very presence validates really the entire convention, the entire affair that summer. And Washington also did not need to engage in the ratification debate. He doesn't need to write any essays. He doesn't need to go to Richmond at the Virginia Ratifying Convention and give speeches. Why? Because he signed the document. That spoke volumes for Washington. It meant he supported this new constitution, this new republic, this new government, this new experiment in liberty.
What kind of car do you think George Washington would drive?
Well, I mean, I've seen him in the ads, right? Is he driving a Ford Mustang? I mean, so yeah, and I think there's an American flag attached to the top that's waving in the breeze. So I'm gonna go with Mustang. He's gonna drive some American muscle for sure.
What do you think Washington would think about the state of the roads on the George Washington Memorial Parkway, which is what we're driving on right now?
He'd be like, wow, you fixed all my roads.
Yeah.
Because they used to be a lot bumpier than this, even though they're extremely bumpy. But, you know, he would also ride on horseback, and as Jefferson called him, he was the finest horseman of his age. So I feel like Washington would be able to navigate these roads, whether he's on a horse or in a Mustang.
Favorite article in the Constitution?
Favorite article in the Constitution? Well, I mean, this is not a question that I get at many talks I give, but yeah, I don't know. They're all cool, and I can get really kind of all constitutional nerdy right now, but yeah, I think because it's a lightning round.
Yes, you're already over time.
Yes, I'm already over time, so I'm going to go maybe with Article 5, right, which is the amendment process, because I think it's kind of cool, don't you, that the framers of the Constitution produced this document that is supposed to sort of, you know, last as the fundamental law of the land. It's supposed to endure, and yet they provide. And everything's sort of carefully calibrated, all the other articles, all the other parts of government, and yet they provide a means by which it can be changed and amended by future Americans. So as circumstances change, as new debates come up and so forth, they're able to sort of allow the document to kind of stretch a little bit with the times and adapt to changing circumstances. I think that's pretty cool. It's definitely a measure of prudence on their part or practical wisdom.
Happy Constitution Day. He's just looking at me like, what's her problem? Pardon me. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun driving over the bumpy roads of the Washington, D.C. area. Happy Constitution Day. A super big thank you to Tony for accompanying me. We didn't get a ticket, we didn't have an accident, and we got to talk about the Constitution and why it's such a big deal. So, on behalf of everyone at BRI, happy Constitution Day.
Happy Constitution Day.
Take care.
That segment was a lot of fun. I love seeing those two in Civics in a Civic. Tony's favorite article, Article 5, is so on theme today. The idea that we can continue to choose how our Constitution is structured over 235 years after its signing is really awe-inspiring. So here it is. It's time for the big reveal. The Bill of Rights Institute honors and supports history and civic teachers across the country. We lead programs and host opportunities for teachers to grow their craft and their practice. We're even celebrating 5 years of the work of our National Teacher Council. And this year, we wanted a way to find and honor the top civic teachers in America. Out of our 10 incredible finalists, it's finally time to announce our National Civics Teacher of the Year. Congratulations, Mr. John Quesenberry. Mr. Quesenberry is a longtime civics teacher at Woodrow Wilson High School in Beckley, West Virginia. Quesenberry has long been one of the leading advocates for civics and social studies education in West Virginia. He was named the 2022 Teacher of the Year at Woodrow Wilson High School, where he has taught for more than 20 years and is a former president and current executive committee member for the West Virginia Council for the Social Studies. Known by many students as Coach Q, Quesenberry has devoted his time to coaching youth football, basketball, wrestling, and track and field, and serving as an advisor for student organizations such as Model United Nations. For Quesenberry, teaching civics is a calling that allows him to help his students learn about their rights and responsibilities as citizens. We are honored to celebrate John and the many civics teachers like him for their vital work on behalf of our students and our nation. Please enjoy this clip of John receiving notice of his award, courtesy of NBC affiliate WVVA.
John Quesenberry, concerned that the bell was a little bit late today, walked into the cafeteria for a big surprise.
He had to share with us his passion for his students and for his subject. And then he went through a series of interviews with our staff as well, and his application just rose to the top.
What sets Quesenberry apart, you might ask? His students know the answer.
He goes by the textbook and then he relates it to today's day, to our lives today, and he makes every class period, a bit more fun, a bit more interesting, exciting, and he's a fantastic teacher.
More than being a great teacher, administrators say he's also involved in just about everything else, from coaching to Model UN.
A lot of it is coming from a little school where nobody really believed in you and you just wanted that opportunity, but you didn't always have those. Well, now I'm at one of the schools where there's all kinds of opportunities, and I want kids to have that, whatever they're good at, even if it's something they don't know yet, that they have that opportunity, that chance to do it.
A former student of Mr. Quesenberry, his principal, Ryan Stafford, says he has a knack for storytelling and a true talent for bridging the past with the present.
We've known it for a long time, and we've appreciated him for a long time, but now I'm glad that the entire state of West Virginia and this great country can see it as well.
Here for you in Beckley, I'm Amy Moore, WVVA News.
Congratulations, Mr. Quesenberry. You can really see the impact he has had on his students. I mean, he even taught the principal. Rachel, I've had a lot of fun exploring reflection, choice, and self-government with you today.
I've had fun with you too, Kirk. This is the purpose of Civic Holidays, to reflect and dialogue about our nation's past, present, and future.
And we hope you don't stop your celebration of Constitution Day with our program. All across the nation, different groups are doing events to mark the day. For example, United We Pledge is reading the Constitution aloud throughout the day. Be sure and check them out. We've put a link below.
We also hope you continue to study and learn with us throughout the year. We have a lot of new and exciting things to share, including a new app and website features, new resources like Heroes and Villains and Slavery and the Founding. And if you haven't already, sign up for our educator newsletters and twice monthly e-lessons that share current and relevant resources straight to your inbox.
We have the opportunity to choose, by our conduct and example, whether we maintain our self-governing society or not. What that really means is that through our actions, we have the opportunity to support the dignity, equality, and natural rights of everyone in our communities by respecting and promoting their ability to self-govern.
So thank you to all the students and teachers and Americans learning and reflecting to support the future of the American Republic. And thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you soon.